Jesus is calling you. And what kind of vocation director would I be if I didn't grab onto that line from the gospel? Jesus calling Bartimaeus, but Jesus is calling everyone to holiness, right? The Second Vatican Council made a point of saying that. It's not just the priests and the sisters, but everyone is called to holiness. So Jesus is calling holiness starts here, right? In baptism, is nourished by Eucharist. Jesus is calling everyone to this altar. Everyone. People watching on live stream at home, people who only come on Christmas. Jesus is calling you every single Sunday because he wants to change your life. And some of us, Jesus is calling to give our life. Men as priests and deacons, women as religious sisters and consecrated virgins. What's a consecrated virgin? What's that? Have you ever heard? They're the secret agents of the church. I think I saw one in this church today as I processed through, and you probably don't know who they are. It's a very mysterious vocation. Jesus calls people to all of these vocations, and we should listen to that voice. Some just aren't listening at all. Lives filled with noise, busyness. Some have heard the call and are resisting it. But I remember being at that point myself. Am I really, could he be calling me? Boy, it's an awful lot to give up. And at some point in my prayer, Jesus just kind of grabbed me by the shoulders and said, kid, stop thinking about everything you're going to lose and think about what I want to give you. Well, that made a big difference, and I can tell you, he's given me fulfillment far beyond what I ever had before I took the collar. A priest in the order of Melchizedek, in the letter of the Hebrews says, it's a profound calling. And if Jesus is calling you to it, you should answer and surrender. Imagine if Bartimaeus never followed the call when Jesus called him. He'd still be blind, right? Jesus wants to change our lives for the better, for the whatever he is calling us to, and we should follow him. Whatever you do, don't listen to the crowd, the fickle crowd. Did you hear them all? Bartimaeus, he hears Jesus is coming and he wants to be healed. So he's like, Son of David, help me. And immediately the crowd shushes him, right? Go. You're embarrassing us all. You're making a scene here. He's a busy man. He doesn't have time for you. And then Jesus turns around and says, no, call him. Bring him over. Well, all of a sudden, they can't help him enough, right? They're tripping over them. Oh, he's calling you. Oh, let us help you. Aren't you wonderful? Come right this way. The fickle crowd, right? These people would go on to develop the internet, where they say one thing 1 minute, and then trends change, and everybody denies everything, flipping and flopping back and forth. I once met my cousin for lunch. He was working at a factory. He was in the design area. They were designing products, and so a great day. It was kind of like this. I grabbed takeout. I met him. I had the day off, and we're eating lunch. And it's break time in the factory, and people come out and they're hanging out outside, and one guy is standing there, it's like a 90-degree day in June, and he's just like this. And I said, I wonder why that guy's wearing a black cap. And my cousin said, oh, well, there's a couple of hip-hop artists that are very popular right now, and they wear black caps, so I see a lot of people doing that. And I said, really? I used to get picked on in school when I would wear a hat like this in the middle of winter when it was snowing, and I walked to school and people would mock me for it. And now just because a couple of hip-hop artists say it's the cool thing to do, everybody's got them on in June. The fickle crowd, friends, don't listen to them. This is our society. We need to listen to the voice of Jesus and where it is calling us to, not the internet. Don't even get me started on artificial intelligence. Boy, I have a cousin who is a meteorology major at SUNY Oswego. A lot of the local meteorologists study there. They have a good program. And he asked me one day, this was probably 10 years ago, he was hearing about artificial intelligence. It was going to help us predict the weather like better than we ever have before. How's that working out, right? And he said, because he knew I was in computers before I entered the seminary, he said, what is this artificial intelligence all about? And I said, there's no intelligence there at all. It's nothing but pattern recognition. You cram enough data into a big enough data center, and you have a computer that's fast enough to crank through it all, and all it does is predict. In the past, people who've done this now do this. There's no intelligence there whatsoever. There were two people nominated for a Nobel Prize based on their work. They were kind of the groundbreaking entrepreneurs of artificial intelligence. There are actually three of them, only two won the Nobel Prize. What happened to the third guy? he left the bunch because he didn't see where, he said, this is not intelligence. This is just a whole bunch of mixing and matching done fast enough. He said, artificial intelligence right now is no smarter than your cat. He didn't get the Nobel Prize for that. The internet doesn't like to hear those things, but it's true, friends. I don't worry that Skynet is going to evolve and blow us out of existence. There's no thinking going on whatsoever. You wouldn't know that. This is going to be the next dot-com bust. Everybody is pouring money into this thing, and it's not going to take us anywhere, really. There's applications it'll be handy for. It's not going to change society. And they're building nuclear power plants to power it. Well, that's interesting, because remember when people were saying, these are a great environmental hazard and we cannot have them. Oh, the internet needs it? Well, give it whatever it wants. So the fickle crowd, everybody, back and forth. Don't listen to that. Jesus is calling you. He's calling you to his sacred heart. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. I am meek and humble of heart. Pope Francis just released a new encyclical on Thursday. It's called Dilexit Nos, He Loved Us, and it's based on the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It was going to be an apostolic exhortation, which the Pope writes when he wants people to return to some, devotion. And instead, as he's writing it, he elevated it to a papal encyclical, which is the highest level of document a Pope writes. This is the fourth one in his whole pontificate, because he has some new teaching to give us through it. And I'm not at the new stuff yet. I've just started. It only came out on Thursday. It's brand new. But I love what he's saying. What exactly is the heart? That's where he starts. If Jesus is calling us to his sacred heart, what is the heart anyway? It's not the thing that's beating in our chest. It's bigger than that. And he goes into philosophy and stuff. But he says, Mary is the one who teaches us what the heart is, because twice in Scripture we're told that she kept all these things and pondered them in her heart, right? It's a very Christmas reading. She's pondering all those things. What she kept, the Pope writes, was not only her memory of what she had seen and heard, but also things that she did not yet understand. Oh, yeah, I have that in my life too. These remain present and alive in her memory, waiting to be put together in her heart. Beautiful. And then he says, in an age of artificial intelligence, the Pope agrees with me on this one, we cannot forget that poetry and love are necessary to save humanity, and no algorithm will ever be able to capture that. For example, because people worry they're going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. Never. It cannot replace you. You are unique. The Pope says, think of the nostalgia you feel when, whatever your age is, wherever you lived, you recall how you first used a fork to seal the edges of the pies that you were helping your mother and grandmother to make at home. Well, that's a very specific memory. Warms your heart to think about things like that, right? In the kitchen with grandma when you were young. Little things that are a precious part of everyone's life, the Pope writes, ordinary in themselves, yet extraordinary for us, can never be captured by algorithms. The fork, the jokes we tell, the windows we look out of, the ball of our first soccer game, the shoebox where we kept flower petals or worms, or all these things are precious memories kept deep in our heart. This profound core, the entire person, everything finds its unity in the heart. And then he goes on to Cardinal John Henry Newman, John Henry Newman, who says, the heart speaks to heart. Cor ad cor loquitur was his famous slogan as a cardinal. Heart speaks to heart. Jesus is speaking to his sacred heart is speaking to your heart. The first reading today was from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 31. And if you read beyond the text we have today, he starts to talk about a new covenant. In the Old Testament, those words were used. God was already preparing us for what Jesus would come to do. They call this the New Testament of the Old Testament, Jeremiah 31. It's a beautiful chapter. And God says, I will write it not on stone, but on their heart. He takes his law and he writes it into our heart, and it becomes a part of this matrix that the Pope was talking about, so that if you're really attuned to him, you don't want to offend God. Oh, what can I do to avoid not offend, to make sure I don't offend God? I want to keep his law. I want to listen to his voice. I want to serve him. I want to be kind to people. This is what happens when you start listening to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. There's a lot of famous art about the Sacred Heart of Jesus, but here's one you probably haven't seen. I'm going to hope that it appears on the screen here behind me. This one is I just heard about this image, and it's not tremendous art, but it's powerful because it was carved on a prison wall in Auschwitz. A prisoner named Stefan Jasinski, in all of that depravity, as he's surrounded by cruelty and facing death any day, said, I gotta remember who my salvation is. And he took his own fingernail and he carved that thing in the wall of his cell. That's a guy who was listening to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And in the middle of all that cruelty, he did not cave in. The Sacred Heart of Jesus gave him victory over his sufferings. Jesus is calling you to this victory. Please stand as we confess our faith together. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all